Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be here. My name is Donovan Vicente, and this is The More We Know Financial Guidance Podcast. Here, we talk about money, protection, and planning in a way that reflects real life, not just perfect situations on paper. And because everyone's situation is different, understanding your options is the first step towards making confident financial decisions. So with that said, let's get into today's topic. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The More We Know Financial Guidance Podcast. I want to take a moment to express my sincere appreciation for the feedback and support received following the initial release of this podcast. I truly hope these episodes continue to provide valuable insight, helpful guidance, and information that is easy to understand. All right, let's get started. And I'm really glad that you chose to listen in today because I want to take a deeper dive into something that can hit close to home for many of us and may even stir up an emotional reaction or two. In the last episode, I gave a high-level overview of what personal finance is and how it impacts each and every one of us. We talked about topics like budgeting, saving, debt, financial protection, and long-term planning. So if you didn't listen to that episode, I really highly recommend going back and checking that one out. But before we go deeper into those areas, I wanted to take a step back and spend some time talking about something that I believe is just as important, and that is our mindset surrounding money and personal finance. For many of us, that includes me just as much as anyone else, the issue is not always a lack of information. Sometimes the real challenge is the beliefs we already carry about money before we even begin learning more about it. Those beliefs can come from our personal experiences, how we grew up, our family values, our community, or our culture. And being Native American, I think there's another layer to that conversation, especially within our tribal and indigenous communities here in the U.S. Many of those communities had traditions of trade, exchange, and shared resources that were very different from the modern financial systems we are expected to navigate today. So for some of us, the language of money and finance can feel newer, distant, or disconnected from older cultural ways of living. So in this episode, I'll be talking about where those beliefs come from, how those beliefs shape our behavior when it comes to money and finance, and how we can begin challenging those thoughts in a realistic and healthy way. Because once we start to recognize what drives our current beliefs and views of money and finance and work to change them within ourselves, personal finance can begin to feel more positive, more encouraging, and more possible. So let's dive right in. As we dive into this topic, I think it's important to point out that personal finance is not just about numbers, budgets, savings, debt, or all the financial terms we often hear about. A lot of times when we think about personal finance, we think about strategy. We think about budgeting better, cutting expenses, paying off debt, building savings, investing, or planning for the future. And all of that absolutely matters. But sometimes what gets overlooked is that before any of those strategies can really work, we often have to deal with the mindset we are bringing to the table. Because if we already believe that nothing is going to change, that we are too far behind with our bills, or that personal finance is not really for us, then even the best information may not connect with us the way it should. So our mindset can either support our progress or quietly block it before we even give ourselves a real chance to grow. And that is why I wanted to spend time here first, because if we can better understand our own thoughts and beliefs about money, then we can give ourselves a stronger foundation to actually learn, grow, and apply what comes next. So, what really is money? And maybe just as important, what is it not? One of the next important things to understand is that money is not always just about math, numbers, or logic, as we mentioned earlier. A lot of times, money is emotional. There's a quote that says, money is not math, money is feelings. And I think that describes this idea really well, because when we talk about money, we are not always just talking about bills, savings, debt, or income. Sometimes we are also talking about stress, fear, pressure, responsibility, or even our sense of self-worth. And that is one of the reasons why money can feel so personal. Even though personal finance is often presented as something practical and straightforward, the truth is that money can carry a lot of emotional weight depending on our life experiences, our upbringing, and what money has come to mean in our lives. So if we don't understand that emotional side of money, then sometimes we can be too hard on ourselves when it comes to our habits, choices, and behaviors around money. So, if our thoughts and feelings about money are shaped by more than just numbers, then the next question becomes, where did many of those thoughts even come from in the first place? And I think for a lot of us, they started forming much earlier in life than we may have realized. They can come from what we saw growing up, what we heard in our households, how money was handled in our families, or even how money was talked about in our homes and culture. For some of us, money may have felt safe in the home. For others, it may have felt stressful, private, uncomfortable, or even like something that caused tension at home. And whether those lessons were taught directly to us or not, we still picked up on them. Sometimes we learned from words, other times we learned from silence, and a lot of times we learned just by watching. Maybe we heard things like, we can't afford that, or money doesn't grow on trees, or maybe we just saw how the adults around us reacted to bills, debt, or financial pressure. Over time, those experiences can leave a bigger mark on us than we realize. And I think that can be especially true for many of us from tribal, indigenous, or rural backgrounds where our values, upbringing, and the way our families lived may not have always lined up with the modern financial systems we are expected to understand today. And over time, those early experiences can start shaping what we believe about money, what we think is possible or impossible for ourselves, and how we respond to money later in life. In a lot of ways, our reactions to money today can be an echo of what we saw and experienced when we were younger. And actually, I'd be curious to hear from you on this. What is one thing you learned about money early in life that still sticks with you today? If you feel comfortable sharing, please let me know in the comments below. Okay, let's move on. And as the slide depicts, we all have a money story that we carry. And if you really stop and think about that for a moment, it starts to make sense why so many of us are not really starting from a blank slate when it comes to money. Whether we realize it or not, a lot of us are carrying some kind of money story with us. That story may have been shaped by stress, struggle, silence, sacrifice, fear, or even the belief that money is something we are always supposed to be worrying about. For some of us, it may sound like believing there is never enough. For others, it may sound like believing that financial peace is out of reach, or that money is only for people who have more opportunities or a better start than we did. And after a while, those thoughts can become so familiar that we stop questioning them. We just accept them as truth. But not every belief we carry about money is actually a fact. Some of those beliefs may simply be stories we picked up over time based on what we lived through, what we witnessed, or what we were repeatedly told. And I think that is important because once we start identifying the money story we have been carrying, then we can start asking ourselves whether that story is helping us grow or quietly holding us back. Because sometimes the first real step forward financially is not just learning something new. Sometimes it is recognizing that the story we have been carrying about money may no longer be serving us. So, one thing that is important to understand is that those money stories do not just stay in our minds. A lot of times, they start showing up in our behavior, whether we realize it or not. For you, that might look like avoiding your bank account, putting off a budget, ignoring bills, or feeling anxious every time money comes up. For someone else, it might show up as overspending, consistently worrying, being afraid to spend anything at all, or feeling guilty no matter what they do with money. And a lot of times, those behaviors are not random. They are often connected to what you believe, what you have experienced, and what money has come to mean to you over time. There has been a lot of financial research that points to the idea that our financial behaviors are shaped not just by knowledge, but also by our confidence, our emotions, and the beliefs we carry with us. So, for example, if you grew up around financial stress, tension, or uncertainty, it makes sense that you may respond to money differently than someone who grew up feeling more secure or more informed. And I think that's important because sometimes you may be quick to judge your habits without first trying to understand where they may be coming from. But once you start recognizing that connection between your beliefs and your behavior, then you can begin responding with more awareness, more grace, and hopefully with a little more intention. Another thing that can happen when it comes to money is that stress can slowly turn into shame, and shame can slowly turn into avoidance. For you, that might look like not wanting to check your bank account, putting off bills, avoiding hard conversations about money, or just trying not to think about it at all because it feels too heavy, too uncomfortable, or too overwhelming. And the truth is, that kind of reaction is more common than people think. When money starts to feel tied to failure, embarrassment, pressure, or fear, it becomes a lot easier to pull away from it instead of deal with it head on. There has even been research showing that financial shame can cause people to withdraw and avoid dealing with money, which only makes the situation feel heavier over time. But the problem is, avoidance usually does not make the issue smaller. In fact, most of the times, it just gives it more room to grow. And I think that is important to recognize because struggling with money does not automatically mean you are irresponsible, lazy, or not trying hard enough. Sometimes it simply means money has become emotionally heavy, and that weight can make it harder to face. So if that is something you have experienced, I think it is important to know that you are not alone in that. And more importantly, it does not mean that things cannot change. I think this is also a good place to remind you that if any of this sounds familiar, you are not the only one. A lot of people carry stress, pressure, fear, and uncertainty when it comes to money. And sometimes when you are in the middle of that, it can feel like everyone else has it more together or is somehow further ahead of you than where you're at. But financial stress is something a lot of people deal with, even if they do not always talk about it openly. There has actually been a lot of research showing that money and the economy are major sources of stress for many adults, myself included. So if you have felt that pressure too, you are definitely not alone. Struggling with money doesn't mean there is something wrong with you, and it does not mean you are stuck this way forever. Sometimes it just means that life has been hard. Your experiences have shaped you, and you are still trying to figure things out like so many other people are. And once shame starts to lose its grip, it becomes a little easier to be honest with yourself and a little easier to take the next step forward. Now, the good news in all of this, and that is that the beliefs you have carried about money do not have to stay the same forever. Just because certain thoughts were learned early in life doesn't mean they are permanent. And just because certain habits or reactions have been with you for a long time does not mean they cannot be challenged, understood, and changed over time. That is such an important part of this conversation because sometimes you can start to believe that this is just how you are or that this is just how you'll always respond to money. But that is not necessarily true. The truth is, just becoming aware of it can change a lot. Once you start recognizing where certain beliefs come from, what shaped them, and how they may still be affecting you now, that gives you an opportunity to begin doing something different. A lot of financial research has shown that growth can happen through learning, building confidence, and changing our behaviors over time. That doesn't mean change happens overnight, and it doesn't mean it will always be easy. But it does mean that the way you think about money today doesn't have to be the way you think about it forever. And I believe that's where real hope starts to come in. Because once you realize that some of these beliefs were learned, then you can also begin to believe that they can be unlearned, challenged, and even replaced with something healthier over time. So, once you begin to understand that these beliefs can be challenged, the next step is really taking the time to reflect on them honestly. Because if you have been carrying a money story with you for a long time, then at some point you have to stop and ask yourself what that story has really been built on. And I think one of the best ways to start doing that is by asking yourself a few simple but very important questions. What do I really believe about money? Where did those beliefs come from? Are they actually true, or are they based on something I learned through stress, experience, fear, or survival? And are those beliefs helping me grow, or are they quietly holding me back? I think those kind of questions really matter because they help you stop moving through all of this on autopilot. They make you slow down and really look at what has been shaping your thoughts, your reactions, and your overall mindset when it comes to money. And once you start asking yourself those questions honestly, you begin creating space between who you are and what you have learned. And that space is important because a lot of times that is exactly where change begins. And so as you start asking yourself those harder questions, the next step is learning what a healthier mindset around money can actually sound like. That part matters because having a healthier mindset does not mean pretending everything is easy or acting like money problems do not exist. It really just means learning to think about money in a way that is more honest, more grounded, and more helpful. So instead of saying something like, I'm just bad with money, maybe it becomes, I was never really taught how to handle money, but I can learn. Or instead of saying, I'm always going to struggle, maybe it becomes, I may still be figuring this out, but that does not mean I cannot grow. A healthier mindset also starts to separate who you are from what you have financially. Your worth as a person is not the same as your income, your bank account, your debt, or mistakes you may have made with money in the past. It also starts to help you see money for what it really is. Money is a tool. It is not your identity, and it is not meant to define your worth. It is simply something that can help you meet needs, create opportunities, and move toward the kind of life you are trying to build. I truly believe that kind of shift matters because the way you talk to yourself about money can either keep you stuck where you are or slowly help you move towards something better. Now, as we start bringing all of this together, I want to leave you with one simple thing you can do that may help you start making better sense of all this. Because the truth is, change usually does not happen all at once. It happens little by little, one step at a time. One of the easiest ways to begin is to grab a piece of paper or even pull up the Notes app on your phone and take a few minutes to really reflect on your own money story. Start by writing down what you believe about money. Think about where those beliefs may have come from. What did you hear growing up? What still sticks with you even now? And from there, begin paying attention to what thoughts, habits, or reactions may still be affecting you today, especially the ones that may not actually be helping you anymore. For example, maybe you realize that one of the messages you grew up hearing was, "We can't afford that." And now you notice that money still makes you feel anxious or limited even when you are trying to improve. That kind of realization can be an important first step because sometimes just seeing those thoughts written down in front of you makes them easier to understand, easier to challenge, and easier to start changing. To me, that really matters because small steps like that may not seem like much at first, but they can start building awareness, and awareness can start building momentum. Actually, I'd be curious again to hear your thoughts on this as well. What is one thing about money you wish you had learned earlier? If you'd like to share, drop your thoughts in the comments below. So as we close out today's episode, I really want to leave you with this final thought. Before budgeting, saving, debt payoff plans, and long-term financial goals can really begin working the way we want them to, we often have to first take a look at the mindset we are carrying into all of it. Because if your thoughts, your beliefs, and your past experiences around money have been shaping the way you respond to it, then that matters just as much as the numbers do. And I think that is what this episode was really all about. It was not just about money itself. It was about understanding the beliefs, emotions, experiences, and habits that may have been shaping the way you think about money long before you ever started trying to improve it. And the good news is, just because those thoughts were learned does not mean they are permanent. They can be challenged, they can be understood, and over time, they can be changed. So if there's one thing I really hope you take away from this episode, it is that your financial past may have helped explain some of your habits, but it does not have to decide your future. Thank you again for joining me for this episode of The More We Know Financial Guidance Podcast. And as we move forward into future episodes, we are going to keep building on this foundation and start talking more about the tools and strategies that can help you move forward with greater confidence and clarity. Also, if you have questions, feedback, or episode ideas, please shoot me an email to themoreweknowfg@gmail.com. Also, if you want more information about financial protection or debt solutions, please click on the link in the show's description below. So until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and remember, the more we know, the more we grow.